The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. Cheryl Hentz here along with Dan Rylance, my co-host, and very pleased to welcome back a couple of regulars here to the show. Stu Rieckman, executive editor of the Oshkosh Northwestern, and editorial page and conversation editor Alex Hummel. Thanks guys for being here.
Thanks for asking.
Thanks for having us.
It is getting to be kind of a routine, and we like it, and we've had good comments. I don't know about you, but I've heard nice things from people about your presence when you're here.
Thank
you. We want to just touch on a lot of different news items. It's been a busy couple of months. I think you guys were here probably 3 months or so ago, and a lot of stuff has been going on since then. Probably the two biggest things, the city manager's resignation or retirement, and the school district's ongoing conversations about boundary issues. So thought we'd probably start with, I guess, the city, because that's what we seem to have the most questions about. Obviously, the resignation / retirement of Richard Wollink. He announced that a couple weeks ago. His last day will be October 13th, and a payoff, I believe, of 17 million, something like that.
Thousand.
Yes. What am I thinking of here?
We don't have that kind of money.
No, we don't. Well, I'm thinking about lottery, and winning the lottery.
Sure.
Yes, 117,000. So I guess, the first thing, were either of you surprised by the announcement of his resignation or retirement, or were you maybe expecting something else to happen?
No, I thought that that the council was going to move in that direction of seeking a resolution, something short of termination. And I think that there might have been some discussions back and forth between perhaps the mayor and Mr. Wollink about how this should turn out, or how this might turn out. So I think that it was everything that happened. This was probably the best resolution that the city could hope for.
I had kind of a similar reaction. It seemed like the council was very serious about it, and they weren't just toying around with this. They knew it was a serious issue, and if they were going to close the door and have these closed door meetings about his future employment, that they are considering all options, and that was made clear. I'd like to know a lot more about how the council arrived at that decision. Not that I take issue with it or find fault with it. It's their decision to make. They're the council. Mr. Wollink's the manager. But it helps the community, I think, to know, how did you get there? What were the considerations that got you there, and even like what helped you arrive at the number that you arrived at for the retirement settlement, whatever you want to call it. So. Sure.
Well, one of the things that there's a couple of big unanswered questions that I think that the city deserves some answers on. One, if you remember, Mr. McHugh asked for an executive session to discuss the financing of the 100 block, which had just announced it was going into foreclosure and failing. Now, somewhere between him asking for a executive session to discuss the financing of the 100 block, it turns into a executive session about Mr. Wollink's performance. Now, Mr. McHugh will tell you that was not his intent. It was not his intent to have an executive session on Mr. Wollink's performance. But somewhere between his asking for the meeting and the agenda of the meeting being set, the focus of the meeting changed. And we don't know how that changed and how that came about. So there's an unanswered question there as to what was at play, who made the decision that this is beyond the 100 block anymore, that now we're going to talk about the city manager's performance. And the second thing that I think, and Alex touched on it, is that this wasn't about communications. This wasn't about the city manager not putting out a memo on time or informing the city council in their packet on Friday. There was much more at work to get to this stage. And I think the community deserves to know what their elected representatives were concerned about. And, you know, we don't have to disparage Mr. Walling's performance. We don't have to, you know, have any bloodletting. But I think that the council member should step forward and say, I was concerned about XYZ. Because if we're going to go forward, and if it's a city manager form of government, we need to know what the council was thinking about before they make the decision on the next city manager.
Sure. Well, and I think that's a real good point, Stu. And, you know, correct me if I'm wrong here, but now that the decision's been made, and the discussions of those closed session meetings have kind of come full circle, they can discuss what was discussed behind closed doors,
That's
right?
correct. That's correct.
And again, we don't want to disparage Mr. Walling, but I think it is important that we have some insight into what their thought processes were.
I don't think any counselor coming out of that and willing to disclose what was discussed and, you know, what was talked about and considered, I don't think they would disparage. I don't think there was any disparaging of Richard Walling. I mean, he's a great guy. He's a good man. And I think, I'm guessing, I'd like to know for certain, but I'm guessing there was a lot of consideration about, you know, more things than the 100 block and more things than Stu mentioned the memo, you know. I mean, there's been a lot of hot button issues in the last couple of years around budgeting, budgeting decisions, you know, legal opinions, staff expertise, whole range of things. And again, I'm just guessing, I don't know, I'd like to know for certain, but that those all came into play when these things were considered. So.
Well, I think we've all heard the rumors, too, about how some counselors supposedly said to Mr. Walling, look, if you terminate X, Y, and Z department heads, you can salvage your position, you know, and maybe it's important that we hear some of that discussion, too.
And I think that can be explained, you know, fairly straightforward by, you know, we were concerned about the management of the staff. You know, the direction of the staff was going, and who. You know, and I think that's a reasonable thing for a council member to come forward and say, and let the public draw their own conclusions based on that concern.
Right now, it's all speculation.
Yeah.
Sure.
And conjecture. Yeah.
We don't know for certain. I'd like to. I'm sure a lot of Oshkosh folks would like to know.
I think there's one thing that's evident, at least in my mind, is that the Mayor Frank Tower that you see on the dais on Tuesday night is much different than the Frank Tower behind closed doors with the council. I think that he was very adroit at guiding this process, and I think he had probably a fair amount of support and advice from the council to go forward. So I think that what you see on Tuesday night is not what's happening behind closed doors. I think Frank is turning out to be a much more adept, forceful mayor than what you see on Tuesday night.
I think he's a different mayor than he was a council member as well.
Yeah.
I think so.
I mean, another.
And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Not at all. No. You said in one of your columns, and just to continue on this, that the council members should share their insights about what went on in these meetings. But you clearly have not got a response, right?
No, no.
And it kind of sounds like they've circled the wagons, and they probably have sort of made a decision that they're not going to talk. Is that kind of your sense?
Well, the agreement that the council came up with Mr. Walling has got a provision in there that the council shall not speak ill of Mr. Walling, and Mr. Walling will not speak ill of the city.
Okay.
And I think there's probably some apprehension that, gee, if I say something, is that going to be misinterpreted? Does it violate that provision of the agreement? And does it hold the city at any liability? So I think they're being overly cautious because of that provision in the agreement.
Do you think the agreement came from the city manager or from the council on what they decided?
I think our reporting and some other back and forth I've had with counselors would suggest that it was a back and forth kind of thing. You know, one party made a proposal, take a look at that. The next party slides it back and says, "Well, I'd like to add this." Again, all conjecture. You know, we don't know, but you know, it gets really inside baseball, I think, for a lot of Oshkosh residents. I think there are some people, like the people sitting around this table, who find it kind of interesting and would like to know the answers.
Yeah.
But I think overall, and I think the council's partially aware of this too, that there's just a lot of Oshkosh going, you know what, thank you, Mr. Wolink, for your service.
Right.
You know, you served well, you served long, you stepped in when we needed you. Time to move on. Who are we going to get for our next leader? I think that's the big question that Oshkosh is really curious about. You know, what's next?
A footnote, do we really know why Brian Bain left the meeting as well? Because you people said that, on a good edit, that he really needs to come forth. And do we really know ultimately why he left the meeting?
Well, I think it was pretty clear that when the labor attorney was there, the labor attorney's job is to protect the city from potential liability in labor-related lawsuits. And having Mr. Bain there with his statements that were on the record that he didn't refute, the lawyer probably felt this could lead us down a path that could lead to some litigation that might not be in the city's best interest. So let's just exclude him as long as termination is one of the options being discussed. I think it was that simple. I think the attorney was exercising, due caution in the city's interests.
Do you think the word you used in a couple of headlines, removal, kind of, changed the direction of what really happened? That he, if he was removed, who removed him? And if he removed himself, that's not really a good word. He should maybe recused himself. But the word removal, to me, took the story in a direction that it really wasn't there.
Well, I think that this city council had that as an option, one of several options, perhaps. And we don't know because they're not enlightening us. But I think that was one of the options, and I think there were signals being sent to Mr. Wolink and Mr. Wolink's attorney. I believe, and I could be wrong on this, but I believe our reporting showed that Mr. Wolink made the first overture about a resignation retirement package and what it might look like. And once that happened, then it was okay for Brian Bain to come back into the discussion because it signaled that termination was no longer one of the options being discussed. So there was something else being discussed.
Cheryl called me and she said he's back in because it's no longer terminated. It's something else, and that was, I think you're both right.
I think that the council, when there's a headline that says removal, they weren't calling us asking for a correction on that. So I think that was clearly one of the things that they were considering.
But not to be petty, but he wasn't really removed.
The idea of him being clasped around the the arms and sort of dragged away, no, that didn't happen, obviously. And was it too strong of a word in that regard? I mean,
I'm picky. But
the council, I think, sat around the table and said, it's probably a good idea if you leave.
Right. But you editorially spoke out rather strongly that he should not have left.
Yes.
He was representing the city, and by his recusing or removal, whatever, he let the city down. Because
there are days when I come into work and after writing an editorial on behalf of the paper, and I'll read them again. I'll get calls from people, and I felt like the day that editorial ran that we represented the community sentiment well. That people felt that we need you there. Now more than ever, it's a tough decision. We need our people at the table to help make a tough decision. Not a fun decision at all, but we need you there. We can't have you step away, and that's what we said. Jump
my
right
guess
back
is
in.
he'll be more hesitant to leave meetings in the future.
He probably won't say as much in the future either.
And
that's an unfortunate thing too.
Yeah, it is.
Because I have felt all along that a lot of the counselors, by virtue of their comments, were essentially taking a position on one side or another. I mean, even if you say, I think by and large Mr. Wolink has done a fairly good job. Well, that's kind of taking a position too. And it just, I don't know, it just seemed very odd to me that that particular thing would be zoned in on, and he would basically be sort of ousted by himself or whomever from.
Well, I suspect there was some peer pressure too.
Sure.
Interim director. Is there someone in City Hall that could fill the title of interim director, and if so, who might it be?
You want to play name games?
Well, I think people are talking about.
I think it would be a mistake if the council appointed somebody from inside to run it, because you're going to have mixed allegiances. You're going to have agendas that may not be comprehensive for the overall city. You may have some lack of knowledge of certain things. So I think it would be a mistake if they went that route. Now, are there people qualified to become interim city manager for a duration. I mean, this is not the type of thing where you go to Kelly Services or Manpower and say, hey, give me a temp for a week. But I do think there are people in the community who have the ability and would be willing to serve. And let's just speculate a little bit if you want to. I heard from one council member that Jane Vandehey may be interested. Former county executive, has some knowledge of the budgeting process, ran a big administrative staff at the county courthouse, might be interested. I had another former council member suggest that Bill Free would be very interested if he were asked. Said he will not step up and seek the appointment, but if he was asked, he would take the job. And I think another potential candidate would be Steve Hentz, former mayor, former council member, no city government, no city managers for it. So, the city is not in dire straits in terms of having an interim person who doesn't covet the job. So I think there's some really good opportunity out there for the council to take a look at some resumes and make an appointment that would serve the city well on a 18-month period or however long it would be.
I think the first thing that I think of when somebody asks the question, who do you get for interim city manager, is, well, what's your expectation? And we did editorialize that, the word interim is a bit dangerous here, because it's not going to be like a couple weeks or a month. It's going to be, a budget cycle at least for the city. And so this person is going to have some very serious tasks. They're going to have to watchdog some very big development projects for the city and make sure that they're falling into place on the riverfront and in redevelopment areas. There's going to be new projects coming forward, we know, because the city's South Shore redevelopment area has got a RFP out now for developers to come in and make some proposals, and that'll start coming to bear in the next couple of months. So,
in a city budget that
envisioning it as a job that's going to, or somebody's going to come in and just sort of keep the pilot light on, and I think we said, sign the paychecks and make sure that they're getting out. Not really accurate. I mean, it's going to be you're going to need somebody in there who's got some strategic know-how and is going to look out for taxpayers and some important projects and make sure we're getting quality stuff. So.
Well, in the situation too, I know I read somewhere, whether it was on one of your discussion boards or somewhere else, that previously our Director of Public Works, Jerry Conrad, had stepped in for a period of time. I don't remember how long that was, but clearly the situation was much different then. I mean, we were at a completely different time in our history. Obviously, we didn't have the budgetary constraints we do today, and also I don't think it was for nearly the length of time that we may be looking at here. And like you said, Stu, we need to probably stay away from someone right from in City Hall.
Well, one of the things that the city does not have is a good succession plan internally. You don't have an assistant city manager that's being schooled. We used to have that position when Bill Free was city manager, and the two gentlemen that I can remember were very capable, ended up going out and becoming city managers in their own right. Boyd Kramer, who was the assistant city manager and parks director, and Warren Renando, who was the assistant city manager under Bill Free. Now, when Mr. Walling became city manager, there was no provision to have an assistant that you could say, okay, there is a viable succession plan in place if we need it. So, absent of that, I really don't see how you could reach down into the ranks and find that right person to do the things that Alex suggests need to be done in the next 18 months to 2 years.
I'd forgotten about Boyd. Didn't Boyd fill in when Bill Free became sick? Okay.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
Yeah, and the other gentleman I'm not familiar
Warren
with.
Renando, one of the great newspaper quotes of all time. The problem with town governments are they're the Kmarts of municipalities.
Well, we don't know how long this person's going to be in an interim position. And immediately after Mr. Wolling's announcement, of course, Councilman Palmieri brought forward a resolution that would have put a referendum on the ballot this November. It would have been the only item on the ballot, forcing a special election of about $20,000, I guess. Now, Alex, you guys on the editorial page wrote an editorial supporting that, even though it would have been at a cost of 20 grand, as I said. And you know, there's concerns about whether that's enough time to really fully educate people on what such a change of government petition referendum rather would do. You know, are we going to have a decent voter turnout, or will it be low because that's the only thing on the ballot? And,
right.
You know, people are concerned about other things, but despite all that, you're still, I guess, of the opinion that November would have been the proper time to do this?
Well, the window for decision, for like go time, was very small. I mean, I think we talked about it being really a matter of days to get something on the ballot, certified, and before voters in November. So, you know, there was that whole factor where, what are we going to do? You know, we're going to go for it and try to gauge take the community's temperature in some way, or where we are now, which is what? I mean, I still don't, you know, Stu talked about, and you put it very well when you said succession plan, or what's the next step. What is the next step? I still am a little unclear on that. You know, the council said, I think, we're going to move forward with a search for a new city manager. But yet there's this lingering question, I think a legitimate concern, and nobody's shaking in their boots, but there's a legitimate concern about, well, if a citizen group does form, what do we do? Do we halt the search? Do we continue on in the face of a movement that will or won't generate enough signatures to put something on a ballot? I don't know. So getting back to your question, yes, we did say that November was a good idea, and I think the general spirit behind it was, yes, it will cost some money. It's a down payment on security. You know, you're not throwing the money away on something tactile, or, you know, a armored car or anything like that. You're putting it into a public decision, and trying to gauge what the public wants. It would have been a nice down payment on I guess.
I think there's another way of still going about it, and I hope that somebody on the city council might give this some consideration. But I understand what the flaw of Mr. Palmieri's resolution was. I understand that. It didn't surprise me that it lost. But I would think that you could craft an advisory referendum without specifics, have it on the April ballot to give the city council some direction. So if the electorate comes out and says, yes, the advisory referendum dictates we want to move forward with the mayor, alderman, mayor, council form of government, however the advisory referendum statement, then you've got until November to fine-tune the referendum that would change the form of government. You could specify whether it's going to be aldermen and districts, or at-large, or a combination, if there's going to be a city administrator, and you could present this in November of 2008. Then you have, you know, critical mass going to the polls. High turnout. Then the idea is that you would put that form of, if it passes in November, you'd put that form of government into place in April of 09. Or if the advisory referendum fails, then the council could move forward fairly confident that they've got a manager council form of government. Right now, you know, if I was a city manager professional, I wouldn't be excited about applying for a job in Oshkosh, Wisconsin right now, particularly with the history of referendums and et cetera. I'd want some definitive answer as to whether this is going to be the form of government or not, or is it going to be pulled out from underneath me 6 months into the job.
There's another scenario too, though, that I think somebody brought this up today when we were discussing it at the Northwestern. Could you do an advisory referendum in the February presidential primary, where you know turnout's going to be supercharged? And then, I don't know if the timetable would work correctly, but would you have enough time to turn around and produce something on the April ballot?
See, I think you'd need some time to nail down.
Sorry,
all
we're
of
just going to.
Cheryl's commentary on your blog, when you were opposed to Mr. Palmieri's referendum, a good part of your opposition was, we don't know what it is we're talking about.
Right.
There's too many unknown variables here on the resolution the way it was proposed. So I think that you're going to need, if you do an advisory referendum and it passes in April or February, you're going to need some time to nail down the details, so when the voters do ultimately vote on it, they know exactly what the question is.
Who's going to do this? Who's the solemn on the council? And you're going to need 6 votes to put this advisory? Based on the discussion on Tony's thing, where is this leadership for an advisory referendum going to come from on the council?
Well, I think it would be predicated on whatever feedback that they're getting right now based on the 2-5 vote. You know, if there's no feedback, they're liable to just let it sit the way it is. If they're getting feedback from people that are saying, hey, you know what, self-determination is not a bad thing, let us have a voice in this, then there might be the political willpower to bring it back around as a revised resolution for an advisory referendum as opposed to a referendum that would dictate something.
Editorially, is the Northwestern ready to say we need a change in government? Isn't it kind of...
I think we're at the point right now where we strongly believe that the city needs to make a determination on how it wants to govern itself. Now, we haven't gotten to the point where we've determined what would our recommendation be. Mm-hmm. I mean, again, we would have to see the full question. Okay.
But I asked that question of our editorial board when we met. I flat out said, well, you know, does anybody have an opinion on which form? I mean, are we just there and we need to say it? And I don't think the board was really, the citizen members and the staff members were really ready to.
We weren't prepared to discuss it in its totality because there weren't enough specifics available.
Right.
Do you want to tie the alderman form of government to an advisory vote? Do you think that's equally important?
I think you could. I think you could have two questions. One, a mayor form of government with a city council at large, or a mayor form of government with councilors elected by aldermanic districts, or none of the above. So I think the voters could really zero in on what their preference is. I think that would give the council some very clear guidance on how to go forward.
I think it's time to at least put the advisory vote up. I'm just worried that this is the end of it, that a year from now, if we have you for the show, we're going to be talking about how well the new city manager has done in Oshkosh. You know, I've lived here for 10 years, and I saw those elders of the church at that Tuesday night meeting, all those horror stories, you know, about mayors schmoozing and not being in the office. And I just said to myself, you know, change is going to come very hard in this community for that.
Well, you know, and the thing that I'm hung up on is I look at Green Bay with Jim Schmidt up there, I look at Appleton with Tim Hanna, I look at Mayor Locks and Monash, I look at George Schertz and Nina, and I'm thinking, okay, what do they know that we don't know? You know?
I come back to kind of a point I made earlier that I think there's a lot of people in Oshkosh who, I'll be frank, don't care. I think when they look at what they want for their community leadership, they look at community leadership. Who? What do they bring to the table? What talent? What insight do they bring? You know, aldermanic districts, I mean, I think half of Oshkosh goes to sleep when they hear the phrase uttered. I think there's a generation of people out there who love to have the debate. It's sport for them. It's been sport in the community for a long time. Ooh, do we go back to alderman style or do we keep the council manager form? I do think there's a lot of people out there who just don't care. What they want is vibrant economic development. Who's going to get us there? How is it going to happen? Those are the big questions, not what box-style form of government are we going to put it in.
But see, I think you're right, Alex, but why are we so different in Oshkosh? I mean, Stu, you gave a list of cities, and I've covered some of those communities professionally, and I know that form of government works for them. Why is it that it works in all these other communities, and people here, it's like the Scarlet Sea when you hear it?
Well, I agree. I mean, why do we fear it? That's ridiculous. There's nothing to fear here, folks. I mean, we're still a democracy. You're still going to get, your chance to have your say. It's just a different structure. My question gets to your question, which is, what does works mean? I mean, do we need to have that discussion, I think, in Oshkosh? How does a mayor-alderman form of government work for... Give me a community here, I'm sorry. I'm stuck. Nina, what does work mean? Does it mean you're getting more vibrant economic development? Does it mean that citizen participation and volunteer on civic committees is greater?
Well, let me give you a litmus test.
Sure.
Stroll down Main Street in any one of the 4 cities, and stroll down Main Street in Oshkosh, and do an objective measurement of the vitality, the vibrancy, the economic, retail, commercial that's going on in those cities. Come up with a scorecard, and if the scorecard says that, you know what, downtown Appleton is much more vibrant than downtown Oshkosh. And I don't know that it is. I mean, I have a suspicion. I mean, couldn't you say something's working in Appleton?
Well, you could, but I guess what I'm arguing is you know, it's a matter of correlation. You know, this is it because of the mayoral system, or is it because of better leaders? There, I said it. I don't know. You know, I mean.
Or is it that we just have so many old timers here? Not to disparage the seniors, but you know, we do have. Well, I'm one now too, sort of. At least that's according to AARP's standards. But you know, not to disparage any seniors, but we do have a lot of aging population here, and maybe a lot of those folks just remember things the way they used to be, and they're fearful of what the 21st century type of mayoral aldermanic form of government can be.
Well, I know there's people in town who remember the mayoral system in Oshkosh back in 1957, and I think by all accounts, whoever you talk to, it was pretty bad because you had some unqualified people holding office, mayor office. There was significant turnover every 2 years. You had a new mayor, and I think people are saying, "I don't want that." Well, neither do I. Neither do I. If we have a mayoral system, I would support it on the assumption that we're going to have a highly professional candidate running for office against another highly professional qualified candidate, that you have a great choice and you put somebody in. Now, the problem in Oshkosh is that you'd have to have somebody walk away from a career, kind of like Mark Harris did to be county executive, and say, I want to get out of the private sector into the public sector, and there's risk involved with that. So are you going to be able to attract that candidate that you're talking about to run for mayor because of the risk involved? And I think that's the big overarching question.
Why isn't the Chamber of Commerce, you know, the young business leaders of the community, more involved in this discussion? Or maybe they just like the status quo?
You know, we talked about this the other day, that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I forget what it is, Cheryl might remember this, there was a meeting at the Pioneer Inn, when the Pioneer Inn was still the Pioneer Inn. And it was business leaders in the community concerned about the direction of city government, concerned about economic development, and what are we going to do? And some of the feedback that I got from people that were at the meeting was, you know, is it time come to change the city manager? So it was being discussed that long ago. Well, out of that meeting came Progress Oshkosh. Okay? And out of Progress Oshkosh came Forward Oshkosh. And Forward Oshkosh, Cheryl, as you well know, was the political arm of Progress Oshkosh. And it was headed by Mr. Ben Ganther.
Right.
Well, there's a good call on somebody's part, you know. But since that formation of Progress Oshkosh, the last issue they were involved with was the County Board of Supervisors size of the board. Now, where is Progress Oshkosh? Where are those community leaders that have a stake in what's going on? Why aren't they at the forefront talking about the issues, providing the city with some leadership, some guidance? For whatever reason, they've ducked, you know, and they're not at the table having the discussion. So it's a little bit rudderless right now.
I think there's also this fear in the community of rancor bubbling up, people getting called out. That's the way it works. I mean, that's part of leadership. It's part of discourse. Is you say, I believe in this, I think we need to do this or that, and somebody says, I disagree. Here we go. Good. I mean, you know, we're talking about it. We're deciding what we need to do. Somebody's taking a side and staking a claim on our future, and if they get called out for it, they say, who's with me? And you know, that's how it works.
We had some representatives from Progress Oshkosh shortly after they were chartered meet with the editorial board, and they were looking for some suggestions. And one of the things they were concerned about is kind of the negative connotation that Oshkosh had for people on the outside looking in. What can we do about that? What can we do to change that? And I said, one of the first things you need to do is get some people at the council meeting and talk about what's working. We're going to hear about what's not working, and we should hear about what's not working. I mean, that's fair. But we're not hearing about what is working in the community. And if you're going to turn around the perception of Oshkosh as an economic engine and a good place to live and work and create jobs, you have to have somebody be a spokesman for that. Well, have you ever seen that happen? Have you ever seen anybody come up to the dais to address the council about, hey, I'm glad this is working right. You know, this this signals good things for the community. Well, if city government's not a spectator sport, you know, if you're going to sit in the bleachers and not get into the game, you're going to get what what the other side dictates. And right now, there's plenty of discussion about what's broken and what's not working. And I'm not saying censor that by any means. We need to hear what needs to be fixed in the community. But I think there's a balancing aspect that needs to be that isn't coming to the front.
You mentioned in one of your op-ed pieces too, Stu, about 3 council members being incumbents up for re-election in April. I think that would be Burke Tower, Dennis McHugh, and Paul Esslinger. And maybe the discussion about the future, you kind of suggested maybe it ought to be put on their shoulders a little bit. That they ought to be asked, well, where do you want to take this?
Well, I will openly admit, one of the drawbacks of council manager government is when we ask that question of the candidates, and we ask it every election cycle, the answer you invariably get is, well, it takes 4 people to support anything.
We've heard that before.
Oh, yeah.
And it's such a cop-out answer, and I think a lot of people are getting tired of it, and maybe that's why there's a far more homogenized population in Oshkosh that's like, you know what, maybe mayor, alderman ain't that bad. Because you're going to get, hopefully, you get people, can't guarantee it, hopefully you get people more willing to say, here's what I think. Here's what I want to support. Who's with me? And now there's this sort of timidity, people are concerned about going on the record and saying something that may be politically threatening to others, and that's just an attitude.
Well, one of the things that's lacking about council elections is that council candidates cannot say, my opponent voted for this and I disagree with that, because they kind of run as a pack, as a herd, with the incumbents kind of out in front, and then you have people trying to align themselves a little bit. But wouldn't it be better, even on a fundamental city council or manager council form of government, if you had numbered seats, that if Dan Rylance sits in seat number 1 and his term is up, I'm going to run for seat number 1, meaning that I'm going to have a discussion with Dan Rylance on his performance and what I can do differently. Then I think the issues really have a robust discussion and not the homogenization of the answers that you
You could do that without going to an alderman form of government.
You absolutely could.
Yeah, which might be a compromise between those who don't want to go that far.
And the concern with alderman form of government, at least just for the sake of the forwarding the discussion here, is does Oshkosh need to chop itself up into little pieces geographically? I mean, that to me seems to be one of the big X factors of the whole debate. I don't know. Is that good? Would it get more streets repaired? I don't
yes.
know. A lot of people say
I really believe that.
A lot of people.
And I've lived in 4 cities where aldermen think big as well as for their own area. I don't think areas in town have a representative per se. And you talk to a lot of council members and say, well, gee, I can't do it all.
Right.
It's hard. They're only part-time people.
Right. Our police chief has a very aggressive, forward-looking plan to kind of do that now. I mean, he's already telling his patrol officers that I want you outside your squad cars more often, and I'd like to assign you to specific neighborhoods. So he's already kind of thinking more attention to specific parts of Oshkosh. So I don't know. Maybe it would work. I don't know.
Do we want to switch school board, or you want to keep going on this?
Well, I think just one thing, we'd probably have to, I would think, expand the council just a little bit, maybe by a couple of people. I know in Neenah and I believe in Menasha also, they have 9 council members. And the cities are divided into 3 districts, and you have 3 people from each district. And you serve for 3-year terms, and each year, 1 person from each district is up. And it seems to work very well. And frankly, I don't see the horse trading that people are so concerned about. I see people who do speak out on practically every issue. They have very well thought out, very succinct opinions on things. And they truly do care about the whole community, not just their own little piece of the pie.
Right.
So I think it can work.
I think you're right.
Continuity. Last time you were here, we all kind of gave high grades to what we thought was a more vigorous and articulate common council. Do people still feel that way?
I think we're starting to see some blemishes and some warts.
That doesn't surprise me when you said that.
I think the honeymoon period maybe is expired.
I don't know. I've heard people say that too, that boy, this is things are getting disappointing now, and I don't think it's fair. I mean, this has been a really difficult, almost dark situation when you're dealing with your leadership and a termination, retirement, settlement. I mean, it ain't fun, and you don't get to have eloquent soliloquies up there on the council. It's a lot of closed doors and saying what you can say, and I don't think I would want to say this council's 2 thumbs down. I don't think it's fair to judge them.
One thing that you can say is that there's evidence of some leadership on the council, and the leadership may not always agree with one another on issues, but there is some leadership starting to show up.
Are the meetings too long?
Oh God, I think so, Dan.
I mean, what do we? Bain tried to go with a workshop night. They voted that down. Poor citizens. You got to sit for 5 hours for 5 minutes.
I've got a bold proposal.
Oh.
We always talk about citizen comments and what to do with citizen comments. I say councilor comments, get rid of them. I say if you're a city councilor in Oshkosh and you believe in the sanctity and the importance of a city business meeting, then you say your piece during business. That's what the business of the day is. And councilor comments have become these sort of free will. Yes, I know that they're noticed because we wanted them noticed. And we had to have them noticed because some of the subjects they're broaching
they're quasi-public.
Well, that's what what everybody's waiting for, is to see who's going to, commit the news of the day during their councilor comments. And goodness, that's really not what a meeting's for. There's a lot of grandstanding going on, and there's cut them. But cut them.
Remember one thing is that in the last meeting, when they had a full agenda and it was looking like it was going, look at what Frank Tower did when they came to the vote on the referendum, and all 6 people had kind of more or less rechewed the same arguments back and forth. Frank says, "I'm going to vote against it because many of the reasons that were stated before me. Thank you very much." A 10-second statement. He didn't have anything to add to the discussion, so he didn't. Some of the council members should learn from that.
Well,
do I really have something to add to this discussion, or should I just?
I can guarantee you what when this show is watched by councilors, if they tune into it, which I hope they do, that one thing they're going to say is, that Alex Hummel doesn't get it. Councilor comments are our opportunity to respond to the citizenry. The only time, usually anyway, I see councilors respond to the citizenry is when they're fed up and upset by some sort of criticism or comment made their way. That's part of the job, folks. I mean, public service requires thick skin. It requires you to listen more than speak, in my opinion. And
I think that's really worth thinking about. Does the school board have school board member comments, or the Winnebago County supervisors? No, they'll have citizens' comments, but they don't. And that agenda of theirs is long. It's really a second meeting.
Right.
Good idea.
I think we should vote for that.
Seems to have a unanimous approval at this table.
boy,
Well, as long as we are still on the city, why don't we finish up with the city?
Okay.
I mean, let's talk about some of these blemishes that we're seeing on the council. What are you thinking of there, Stu?
Well,
notice how I put it right back at you.
we editorially we expressed expressed concern about the appointment to the RDA, and I think that was probably not a shining moment of council action. I don't for a second think that this city council should rubber stamp any appointment or acquiesce to anything that's on the agenda. I think that they need to examine things thoroughly. I think on the appointment and the vote on Mr. Omoshinsky was really uncalled for. I think you can vote against him based on whatever reasons you want to, but I don't think you necessarily have to take the individual and put him on trial at the public. If you're going to do that, invite him to come in. I mean, that's the way Congress or the Senate, approves appointments to the cabinet. Have him come in and sit down and say, Mr. Omoshinsky, please tell me about X, Y, Z. I want to know more about that. But I think it was a little bit, I think it was bordered on being an ugly moment, an uncomfortable moment. I mean, I watched it and I thought, I felt uncomfortable with the direction that was going. And I think that was probably one of the blemishes that has showed up on this. Now, I make no opinion on his ability to serve on the RDA. maybe he wasn't the right person for it. Maybe we do need more diversity on the RDA. That's entirely possible. But I think the way the theater played out was a dark moment.
I agree. And, you know, all this talk about sweatshops in third world countries, and we all know at this table that that kind of thing goes on. But did Mr. Palmieri have any evidence that Oshkosh-Oshkosh being outsourced to another country has any connection to sweatshops and child labor? It just, you know, if he really wanted to have labor represented on the RDA, then why not state that up front? Why not bring forward some suggestions?
Yeah.
I wish I could sit down with Mr. Palmieri and talk to him face to face about it, because there's been a lot of, you know, you say one thing over here, somebody else says one thing to counteract you, and I think there needs to be a face to face discussion with him, and that would be fair, because that's not what he did not allow that for Mr. Omashinsky. But yeah, the other point he was making was that why should we allow a person associated with Oshkosh-Oshkosh, and I'm again trying to fairly summarize his point. Why should we allow someone with a history at Oshkosh-Oshkosh, a company that outsourced jobs in the 90s, a seat at our redevelopment authority table? And, you know, there was not complete research either done in that decision, because the outsourcing, I mean, the jobs that left Oshkosh during the Oshkosh-Oshkosh existence left for Kentucky, Tennessee,
Alabama.
They left. So when they left Oshkosh, they left for Middle America and the textile mills of Middle America, which were in a heap of trouble themselves. I mean, there's just a huge amount of history and issues. And again, nobody's justifying or talking about, you know, outsourcing or that sort of thing. There's just so many dynamics and variables in play. And at the end of the day, we have a talented person who agreed to step up and volunteer, who's not at the table. And I'm guessing maybe a little disenfranchised by it all. So.
Well, and in retrospect, it would have been nice had either Burke Tower, Frank Tower, or Brian Bain, seeing the way the vote was going to go, vote no, so that they could be in a majority to bring it back.
Right.
And then I think it would have approved.
I think the whole thing caught people by surprise.
Well, and that's the other issue. I mean, is this gotcha politics? Did Mr. Palmieri have any obligation to tell Mayor Tower that I'm going to object to this, and here's the reason why I'm going to object to it, before the meeting starts? I mean, to me, that seems to be kind of statesman-like, unless you intend to have that ambush play out. I don't think there would have been anything wrong with any council member going to the mayor and saying, you know, I'm not in favor of this appointment. I'm going to object to it. I'm going to tell you why at the meeting. I mean, to me, there's so many things that could have been handled differently about that and still cast the no vote. I don't object to casting a no vote at all. I think that's, I don't think we should rubber stamp, but I think there should be a process in place that has at least an overture of fairness about it.
Here's another big takeaway from all this, more progressive thinking takeaway, okay? We don't have enough volunteers in Oshkosh.
True.
I mean, that's the one big thing that this whole ugliness, spat of ugliness brings up, that people aren't raising their hand and stepping up and saying, I'd like to serve on, you know, Plan Commission or Redevelopment Authority or Board of Appeals, I don't know. That's a problem. Anybody got any solutions for that? I mean, that needs to be dealt with as well. And had we had that ample supply of people, citizens of all kinds, all backgrounds, stepping up and saying, I'll help, I'll serve, we wouldn't be here talking about this today. So who's got the proposal on the city council or in the community to fix that problem?
It's not a very formal process. I have friends that have applied 2 or 3 times, have never heard from the city. You know, it kind of falls in the crack between city manager and mayor. And I think a lot of people, not a lot of people, some people don't apply anymore because they never get never get appointed, and they never find out.
That's a great point, Dan. And you know what I'll do? Right here, right now, I will make a pledge that we will publish the names of everybody who wants to apply for a board or commission in advance, so that the public can know what the pool of talent is, and how they're being either appointed or left on the sideline.
I think that would inject public scrutiny on the process.
I'll make a pledge to do that several times a year when the appointments come up, that we'll publish the list of people who have volunteered for what boards and what commissions before it
good
comes
news
to
story at the very least.
It is.
It is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think we can put some light on the whole process, and maybe it would encourage more people to volunteer.
I think it would.
Good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Gee, we got that taken care of too.
Yes. All right.
What more you got on that list?
And now we're down to like 7 or 8 minutes, so
I know
let's hit the school district.
Can I just hit him with one first?
Oh, sure.
Okay. This is a question from a retired social studies teacher at West High School. I think he had your children, Ed Holliday.
You had me. I was in class with
Oh, I thought you were much younger. I'm sorry. You wrote regarding Representative Carol Owens to rescind the qualified economic offer. And Ed Holliday's question is, what made you change? You've been opposed to it for a long, long time.
Yes, and here's the pact that I will make with Ed Holliday.
Okay.
The minute Carol Owens puts that piece of legislation in the Assembly, I will support it 100%.
Okay. Well, that'll make him happy, I think.
All right.
Yeah, okay, that was easy. Let's go to school board.
School board. And we know, Alex, because your wife is a consultant working with the district, that you kind of have to recuse yourself from a lot of the discussion. But obviously, you know, boundary issues continue to be discussed and discussed. Do you guys see that something is going to be decided here in the relatively near future?
There is you know, we had Dr. Howman and Shelley Musa up at the editorial board a couple weeks ago, and one of the subjects that I asked them about is the sheer exhaustion factor on the part of the staff that's working on these projects. And Dr. Howman acknowledged, yes, this is taking a toll on us emotionally and sapping our energy, and it's getting a little bit demoralizing. So, and I don't think people have stopped and thought about the administration preparing for a school year, having to go about their jobs, you know, to administer the school district, and that they are completely and absolutely worn out and somewhat dejected at the way the process has run out. Now, they're meeting tonight. This is Thursday, and one of the things that's going to come up, Dr. Heilman may very well propose, let's bring in an outside consultant to propose boundary changes. Because basically they feel we've looked at everything there is to look at. You know,
Can't they make a decision with what they have rather than bring in someone else?
And that's the question. If you bring in somebody from the outside, the presumption is they're unbiased, they're objective, that you can't accuse them of having an agenda behind the scenes. And I think that, you know, part of the process has just worn them down to the point where they just don't know what to do next. The administration just does not know what to do next. And you know, some of the commentary at the last meeting from the minutes that I've read is that we don't know what the board wants us to do. They've asked for information, we've given them information, and we're not getting any guidance back. So there's clearly a heightened level of frustration on the part of the administration as to how this thing is working. So will they ever come to a conclusion? I don't think the existing board and the administration is going to be able to on their own.
Although I can already hear the arguments there. Well, the school district is paying the bill for the consultant, so therefore they're going to just go along with whatever the school district kind of slips them the information about, hey, this is what we want to do.
Well, there's no question that there's a hint of conspiracy theorism going around on some of the people who are opposing the plans. You know, we've encountered that ourselves in our coverage, that there's a conspiracy at play. And so, yeah, you're probably right that if an independent consultant comes in from wherever, there's always going to be that hint that somehow that process is going to be tainted.
And no matter what they do, there's always going to be that contingent out there that says, not in my backyard, not with my kids, not with my neighborhood schools. I don't see how they can ever get past that hump.
Trailers for classroom. You back up some trailers to any school and say, your third grade class is going to meet in this trailer, or they could be in the school down the road that's got plenty of classroom space. Then we might get some movement.
Well, there we go.
I mean, FEMA's got some trailers that they're not using right now. Haul them up here and put them on the back of some of these schools, and
I think we just guaranteed 800 new Osh conversation posts with that.
Well, that'll drive
Put the little
up
buggers in the
readership.
trailers.
All right. But whatever they do you think that it's going to, further their cause for a multi-million-dollar referendum next year?
I think one of the problems that the school districts face is that the community at large is fractured, and the real key to this is if the school district, if they do have a referendum, if it comes to that, they have to get out beyond the parent constituency. They have to get out to the people who don't have kids in school, who are going to end up footing the bill, and they're going to have to make a compelling case to that block of voters and figure out how to get them to the polls. Because I think the groups that have been involved with the discussion so far are fractured enough that they're liable to vote against a referendum because they object to the way the boundary lines were finally drawn up.
Okay. Anything else on schools?
Well, the budget impasse in Madison is driving nails into all of these local areas. When are they going to end that?
We talked to Ed Huck, the Alliance of City Executive Directors, for our live chat on today, September 6th, and he thinks the budget, something will come forward, if not by the end of this month, maybe by the end of October.
Oh, and they were supposed to be done in July. Great job.
Well, we have supported we wrote an editorial.
I read it.
Saying NB, no budget, no pay. I think it's a proposal many Wisconsinites would support.
I think you're right.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, one of the problems that's going on is that the Republican majority in the Assembly is not a solid majority. And I think there's some reluctance on the part of the leadership in the Assembly to move this thing forward. I think they're worried about some defections.
Okay.
And so the leadership's got a real problem. I mean, you don't have John Gard there anymore. You don't have Jensen there anymore to keep the troops in line. So I think there's a splintering of that majority in the Assembly that's worrisome to the leadership.
Okay. Carol Owens, you had mentioned her before.
Yes.
There was an editorial that you guys did back about 6 months ago. I believe it was in March. Carol is bringing back this idea of posting the legal type notices that the meeting notices that school districts and communities are required to right now run in newspapers. She wants them posted on like the school district's bulletin boards or their websites, what have you. You guys oppose that, and obviously loss of revenue is one reason. Very quickly, why else?
Well, I think it's a fundamental discussion about government interacting with the public. I'm all in favor of putting them online, but that's going to exclude a certain segment of people in the community because it becomes an Easter egg hunt. Do I go and look for it? In the newspaper or in printed version, it's there. You read it, you don't read it, but it's delivered to you and you can find it readily. If it's on the internet, how do you go about finding it? And it may very well disenfranchise people who have a legitimate interest in knowing what licenses are up for approval, what business is being transacted. And I think that government shouldn't recede into the background. Government should be front and center and pushing its information out to the people in the community and the state. And
her argument is, I think if I understand it correctly, that it's about money. And I think what we're saying is there's a nobler purpose here, and it's about public awareness.
Right, and not everyone has computers. We're out of time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
We'd love to have you back in like another 3 months or so.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Dan, thanks. Thanks to the crew, and always thanks to you at home. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got All Right on Oshkosh.